What the hell is that?
It's a fucking vest. I'm trying to look older.
You look like Pinocchio.
Okay, listeners, we are back for episode 3 of our back to school, somewhat end of school, all things involving school season. We have a returning guest, my husband, Dom Palladino. Very excited. Michelle, we are getting a little crazy this season. We have a wide variety of releases. We're going to start with you because this is the first time you've seen Superbad, which is crazy to me. And I'm just going to hit you with the hard questions of what did you think?
I will preface this by saying that you texted me. I don't know if it was when you were watching it, but you were kind of like apologizing in advance, saying that you thought I was going to hate it. And I'm happy to tell you that I loved it. Between this and The Notebook, I would pick this movie every time. You know, I had always heard about this movie. I feel like this movie is very popular. I guess it's because of the time that it came out. Did this come out in like 2007? That was like the year I got engaged. So I was like, you know, planning my wedding. We were moving into our first house. And I think I just wasn't really focused on like what was going on in pop culture that year, really in general. Yeah, I do think that I kind of had this preconceived notion that it was like stupid, probably a little immature for where I was in life at that time. And, you know, now my 40s, so maybe now too. But yeah, I think maybe with all of that, thinking that I wasn't going to like it made me like it more because I had like zero expectations for it. I'm almost glad that I got the opportunity to watch it for the first time in the way that I did, by myself, with the captions on, really reading it as much as I watched it and looking at this movie through a writer's lens rather than just being a kid.
Sigh of relief. Now we can get on with the episode. Okay, Dom, what was he up to? Do you remember seeing this movie for the first time?
It came out summer of 2007, end of middle school, beginning of high school.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it came out at the right time for me. And it was a big DVD movie. Everyone had this movie on DVD. So you'd always watch it at people's houses throughout high school. I don't remember the first time I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it a million times. And I think I had a different reaction watching it this time. And I don't know if that's because I'm older and the humor of the movie kind of, I have a different reaction to it at this age, or it hasn't aged as well or whatever, or if it's just that I've seen the movie so many times that I've memorized every line and every joke, and that I there's no really surprises anymore. Speaking for myself, this movie completely nails the way high school guys speak to each other, for good or bad. But it's just exactly how I spoke to like my friends in high school. And the plot, even though it's such a low stakes plot, it's such a good idea of something that would be such a big deal to someone at that age, and something that you would feel like the biggest night of your life.
I felt the exact same way. I've seen it so many times. I think this was probably one of the most quoted movies of my high school years, especially with our cousins. But this time around, I was just like, I think that's probably why I texted you that, Michelle. And I was having that conflicting feeling too of, do I feel this way because I've seen it so many times, or has my humor shifted? And I think that there are elements of it that make sense, of like the things that I think I find funny now. I found them funny at the time, but I think I focused on maybe some of the more raunchy parts. And now my humor is a little bit more of the subtleties that I still loved and quoted all the time. But I think I've kind of like really thrown away some of the things that I previously would have like quoted and thought was funny, which, you know, was a little sad. It felt like throwing a piece of my youth away while watching it this time. But I think it's one of those things that's probably a little bit overdone just because it's been a repeat movie for me and I've seen it so many times. So it's not like there's this element of surprise when some of these quotes come up and I'm cracking up. Because the leads are males, I can't really say that like my high school experience was the same, even relating to Emma Stone's character. But I feel like when you think about parties and like the end of the year, I remember this summer going into college, it was so fun because everyone always had like graduation parties, which I know this was just more of like a party at someone's house, but there were, everyone's talking about getting fake IDs before they go to school. And there's just kind of this element of like this next chapter of your life. And you're still so stuck in that mindset of, I want to go to this party and I want to see this guy or girl that I'm interested in and I want to hook up with them. Like Dom said, it came out at the right time, I think, for my age, of that it was a movie that was present throughout high school, and there were, elements on the cusp of going into college that ended up being relevant. It's an interesting one.
I'm curious, do you guys know the other movies that were kind of put together by this creative team?
I don't know why this one is coming to mind. Maybe it's just because a lot of the actors are in it, but like This Is the End, I think came out while we were in college or before we went to college. But a lot of these actors all had crossovers in films during this time period. I don't think there's prominent ones that come to mind because this one overshadowed just like the comedy category of the time period so much. Another one that comes to mind is like Pineapple Express, which James Franco's also in. Dave Franco's also in this. He has a very short cameo, which we will get into. But I don't know, Dom, does anything come to mind for you for movies that you watched a lot that they were in?
Yeah, I mean, there's all the Judd Apatow movies, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, all those movies with some people in the cast, like Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill and all those people. I have different opinions on each of those movies. Superbad obviously resonated with me just because of what I was saying before, where the plot was more relatable to my life as opposed to 40-Year-Old Virgin or Knocked Up. But yeah, I mean, there was that run around like 2007 where all those movies were super popular.
I think that this crew really had this like solid comedy group where they all were kind of in the same movies, and when you listen to interviews, and it's very clear that this is truly how most of them are in real life and like how they interact with each other, at least from a lot of the things that I read about This Is the End. It was like pretty on point with how their friendship was. I'm also really happy that Jonah Hill and Emma Stone, this is, I think, her first movie or one of her first movies that they went on to stay friends, and they had a show Maniac together they came out with a couple years ago. It was super weird, super out there, completely different genre from this, but they both have completely exploded in their careers. And it's always special to see these types of movies and then follow these actors that you grew up with in adolescence and see where they are at today and see if they still have a bond and connection from something that they're very well known for.
I also wanted to ask you guys if you've seen the movie Booksmart.
Yes.
Okay, I saw that on an airplane probably within the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when this movie started, that movie immediately came to mind as like kind of a girl version of this story. I think it would be really fun to, have a night or have a theme where like you watch those two movies together.
Yeah, and it's really special because Beanie Feldstein is Jonah Hill's sister, so it was kind of like passing the torch.
Have you seen Lady Bird?
No.
Great.
I think Lady Bird is a closer comparison to Super.
I don't think so.
It's a very different sense of humor. I just think it's a very well-made movie. It's Greta Gerwig.
Yeah. But yeah, I think for Booksmart, I liked it. I know we're not covering that, but there's certain scenes like when they take the drugs and they become Barbies, like I was crying. I thought it was so funny, but there were other things that I think fell flat for me. But I think it's because I was older and I'm not of that age group. But I think if I had been in high school when that movie came out, I would have thought it was absolutely hilarious. So I think it is just telling that Superbad had such an impact on our age group because we were right at the cusp where all of this was going on, and that was kind of something we could really connect with. Okay, Dom, so you mentioned watching it this time around, you had a different perspective on it, but what holds up for you? What do you still really love?
Not to sound like Roger Ebert, but I really appreciated the music this time around. I feel like the music was really fun and very unique for a high school movie. The dialogue for at the time was very spot on for how people that age spoke to each other in 2007. I loved the relationships everyone in the high school had with each other. One part of the movie that cracked me up was Moroki, how he's just your partner in home ec class, and then you see him at a party and you like have this deep heart to heart with him. It felt very realistic to when you have this completely normal relationship with an acquaintance at your high school, like just someone you sit next to in class, and then when you see them at a party, you're like, oh my god, Baroki, and then like you have this like deep bond with them. And I also loved how everyone in the high school knew each other. It just felt very, I mean, I went to a pretty large high school, but still like how everyone knew each other and everyone knew everyone's personality. So when Fogel goes into the home ec class and the teacher, like he's done this a million times before, and the teacher is like annoyed with him and is like, and knows who Fogel is, even though he's not in the class, and has to tell him like, you're not in the class, go away. And when Seth is on the soccer field when he's not in the class, but the coach knows who he is and he's like, you got to stop coming onto the field. You're not in the class. That part was funny. Also, it felt very real to a high school.
I love that. I will say a lot of the classes that they're in, which just made the scenes that much more interesting. But I was thinking, oh, I wish I had a wood shop class, or I wish I had a home ec class. Like they had so many things beyond. And it felt so realistic that it was the last week of school and just no one gave a shit. Do you remember that feeling of just absolutely not wanting to do anything and everyone's messing around? And it was sort of the best feeling in the world because nothing mattered. But I agree, Tom. I feel like even the concept of everyone, the way that they were characterized, you knew someone like that in high school. So the two of them were inseparable. Everyone knows the two of them together, and they kind of kept this ongoing comment of, oh, really? You guys party? We never see you out at parties. But it wasn't in a mean way that they couldn't come. It was more so like, oh, really? I didn't know that. I would love to hang out with you. And I also feel like part of the appeal, Dom, with like Moroki, which I also felt was so funny, is when you were in party settings and it was people that maybe you know or say hide in the halls with, but once you have liquid courage, you end up like really having deeper bonds with these people.
I'm glad to kind of hear your perspectives on seeing these relationships as realistic, because I didn't feel like I saw that as much when I was in high school, but I also came away from this movie with the theory that even within like the 10 years of our age difference, that I know we're in like technically the same generation because we're all millennials, but I feel like you guys are more evolved. And I had even made a note that I was wondering if like this movie may have even helped contribute to that a little bit, because when I think about the movies that came out right before I went into high school, so we're going to cover Can't Hardly Wait later in the season, and that movie kind of really in the other direction portrays all the silos that happen in high school and how, you cannot talk to certain people if you're in a certain social group. And even though I didn't feel like it was like to that extreme when I was in high school, there definitely wasn't this camaraderie that you feel watching this movie, which is one of the things that I think that makes it so endearing, that you can kind of tell that it's written by adults who, I'm wondering like if they talk about this ever in interviews, or if we ever got the chance to ask them, are they kind of projecting how they wish it could have been when they were in high school, since they're a little bit older than I am. But I don't know, I mean, from your perspective, now you guys have, Dom, your siblings are also a lot younger than you are, so we can kind of like assess what's the next generation. But in your opinion, do you feel like kids are becoming more evolved and kind of accepting of one another, and we're getting away from these kind of high school groups that we really started seeing like in the John Hughes movies as far as like high school stories go.
Just using like high school movies, like the history of high school movies as an example, I have noticed how I think a lot of those like 80s high school movies seem so outdated. And then you get to like the early 2000s kind of wave of like American Pie, Can't Hardly Wait, high school movies that still have those cliques in high school, but they are a little not as rigid. And a lot of those movies, like the whole plot of the movie is that maybe like the cool girl meets like the nerdy guy, and like there's kind of a blending of the cliques. And then like you say, you get to the Superbad movie where there still are like the cool people and the jocks in the movie and the nerds, but it's really not as rigid, and it's kind of everyone's kind of hanging out with each other and going to the same parties. And then you get to the newer movies, and Michelle, I know you said you haven't seen Lady Bird, but I'll just use Lady Bird as an example. One of the running jokes in the movie is that the cool guy in the movie is Timothy Chalamet, but he's not he's not a jock. He's like an environmentally aware, like liberal, like hippie guy, and that it's like kind of a joke on how it's like upends the stereotype. And also like a movie like 21 Jump Street, where I think is a perfect example because it's the older guys pretending to be in high school and going back to school, and their idea is that outdated model of the cliques in high school where the jock is like kind of a meathead and an idiot and like mean to everyone, and then they get to the high school and they realize that the cool people are all like into like stopping global warming and like supportive of like gay rights and stuff like that. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if that tracks with how high school is in reality, but it is interesting how like the history of the high school movie has changed and kind of gone away from that like siloed, really rigid cliques that we used to see in the John Hughes movies.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the younger generation, just even outside of movies, they have more knowledge that they're able to hopefully use in these groups in a good way, which it's always tough because there's this dance of having too much information, and it's impacted them negatively, I think, from like a mental health standpoint and like having phones and all these things. But it's interesting of the shift of how it's portrayed in movies. Michelle, what about you?
I guess to kind of continue this conversation about the way that high school kids are in this movie, I think one of my favorite parts of this movie is just the relationship between Evan and Seth. It felt really almost revolutionary is probably too much of a dramatic word to use, but I couldn't think of any other story where you're kind of seeing a relationship like this. I liked the dynamic between them. It didn't, even though they were really different, and Jonah Hill's character was definitely more of the like outgoing one who was kind of like driving things. There was something about just the way that they were written, the way that they talked to each other, the way that they were around each other, that it didn't feel like two guys being friends that you see in every other movie. Like they didn't overly cartoonize it. These characters were very well formed. They had a lot of nuances to them. And yeah, it was refreshing to see that friendship. And I would say between the two of them, I mean, this shouldn't come as a surprise that I like this one more than the other, but Michael Cera's character was just, I could not love him more. I mean, I'm a huge Arrested Development fan, and I feel like this character is very similar to who he played when he plays George Michael on that show, but it is different. Evan has his own, characteristics. Talking about like those John Hughes movies, I feel like he would have been kind of like the Anthony Michael Hall prototype in a movie that was made in the 80s. And this is so much more dynamic, where like, yes, he's the passive one between the two of them, but he's still like cursing and he still likes girls and he still says crude things too. I mean, not to the level of Jonah Hill, but yeah, it was really refreshing to see that. I'm not submitting this as my favorite line, but I was dying at the beginning when they were talking about like the first conversation that they're having about, choosing the best like porn subscription. And he makes a comment about like, he wouldn't mind paying it as much if the production value was higher. And I was just thinking that would be something that I would say. And then I also just really enjoy, this was like a subtlety, but I feel like this really exemplifies like how good the development was of his character, but also how well he played it. I believe that it's when he's talking to Becca in the hallway, but she kind of asks him like that question, like, oh, like I thought that you guys would go to school together. Like she seems kind of surprised. And like he says,
yeah, I mean, it's not too bad. I mean, it should be okay. I'm not too worried about it, really. Don't worry about it. I'm not worried at all.
Just really showcasing that nervous energy. You can see that he's uncomfortable with it, that he's upset about it, but it's like the opposite of like poor exposition. Like we're really seeing who this character is in this really subtle way that's not trying to like hit you over the head with it.
One thing that I noticed this time around towards the end of the movie when him and Seth kind of have this big falling out and are going back and forth about how he's mad that he didn't tell him that him and Fogel were rooming together. And it was such a very accurate feeling of him saying like, listen, I'm afraid to room with other people. Like I am not open to meeting new people. I'm nervous. Like you've basically been my crutch for so long. And I just felt like it was a very earnest thing that he said, that the way that he had said that.
I thought that the writing on a line level was excellent. It was very stylized. It had a very distinct voice. That's kind of why I was asking you guys if you had seen movies like Pineapple Express, because I'm curious to see if it's easily recognizable that these movies were all kind of written or developed by the same people. But I was laughing so hard at so many of the lines, and I kept thinking, of course people love this movie. Of course people quote this movie over and over again because there are so many memorable, clever lines in it. Yeah, their comedy is just really good. One of my favorite just comedy tropes in general is like the concept of having strangers come together in a situation and like immediately act just like they've known each other their whole lives. So just the entire setup or the dynamic with having McLovin with the two cops, and when they first go to Bailey's and they're trying to arrest the guy and they're like, get him, McLovin, like that they immediately like jump to the situation and then he's with them for the whole movie. And the movie watcher in me, who is conditioned for this to happen, kept thinking like, when are they going to catch him, or when are they going to, and like it never happens. They just kind of keep doubling down on it. And I thought that was so creative, but it felt like that's what made sense for this movie. It wasn't like they were trying to do something different just for the sake of doing something different. I just wanted to second what Dom said about the music. When the credits started, I got really excited. I was like, I don't think this movie takes place in the 70s, but we kind of were getting this great 70s vibe at the beginning. And I was really happy to see that they kind of continue with those music choices throughout the movie, but also mixed in some more contemporary ones. And it felt well balanced and made me want to go listen to the soundtrack.
I appreciated that choice.
Yeah, I think it's just creative. Like, I don't know. It is like, it's a very well-made movie. I think like the costuming is great. Like the costumes are so memorable, and there's some like comedy to it, like with the Aladdin vest. And there's just a lot of thought put into like the behind the scenes, below the line like aspects of the movie. It's well written, it's well directed. The acting is obviously great considering we have Emma Stone as like a side character.
Yeah. And there's some really like creative, they were experimenting. I always think about the scene where they're on the bus, which I'll save for parts of my favorite lines, but where the alcohol bottle goes flying in the air and they picked Goldslick vodka, and you kind of see the golden flakes, and there's a lot of build up, because can you imagine like your crush asks you to buy them a bottle of alcohol and you're so close to the finish line of delivering this and then it shatters. So I just felt like there were certain creative elements that were very well thought out and they had fun shooting it. I think also living in LA now, it was fun to watch this take place in California because it felt I was like, wow, this is probably what it really felt like to go to high school out here, and them just driving all over the place. All these places were clearly very far away from each other. Them, taking the bus to go even to the liquor store. It felt like we were along for the ride. I've never been to a big random party in the valley, but when they go to that random person's house, some of my favorite sections of the movie, ironically, that it doesn't even have to do with, them being at this big high school party, I thought was a really clever inclusion. We spent a lot of time in that house, and talk about random and just having people who had really had nothing to do with the movie, but just really smart comedy writing.
They really captured that energy of either being at a stranger's party or being at a party and you're in a room with like people who like were like a little older than you and like just had really dark energy to them, like, just really angry and like up to some illicit behavior, and you don't know anyone. Like they really capture the energy of just like really menacing older people at the party. You're like, who invited these people?
I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about the cops, because just going back to how smart that inclusion was, Michelle, like you said, it could have just easily been them like getting him in trouble. I just think about how different this movie would have been if they just would have gone into the liquor store and arrested Fogel, but they made that in a completely separate plot line of this movie, and so much comedy happens there. And like Dom said, this is a low stakes movie, but I always am like shocked when we get to the scene where Seth gets hit by a car for the second time in the movie, and their character really changes so quick, and I'm like sweating thinking about being in this situation. Because I think like going to high school parties, there was always that underlying fear of the cops coming, or being in a situation with the cops. And I think having all these tidbits is what made it a whole really smart movie.
Yeah, I was not expecting them to be such a big part of the movie. I thought that they were going to show up in a couple scenes, like as a cameo.
Yeah.
Even though I guess that wouldn't have even made sense at the time that this came out, but it was very surprising, and it worked for me. Anything else for you, Laura?
I don't know. I'm going to be completely honest. I didn't even have a what did we love section. I just have, I think it looks like about 25 favorite lines. I am curious to hear both of your opinions about what you didn't like.
I'm always excited to hear what Dom didn't like. He always has good insight. So Dom, why don't you go first?
They're very thoughtful.
I don't think there's really many flaws to the movie. I mean, I said before that I didn't laugh as much this time around. I'm not saying the movie's like canceled or anything. Like I do think the dialogue is like a product of its time, and thinking of that, I do think it's like aged pretty well considering the amount of like sexual jokes that there are in there, and like the name calling they do. It's such a quotable movie, and after having like 16-year-old kids quote this movie to you for a million years, hearing it again, it doesn't really land as much. I mean, there's more subtle lines that I usually don't pick up on that I was laughing at this time around. I don't think it's like the movie's fault. I think just it's an issue with having movies so readily accessible all the time that you're able to rewatch so many times. I mean, I can only imagine at having the only way to watch a movie was in a movie theater, and you had to hope that they would just re-release a movie in a theater to watch it again. I know people really don't have DVDs anymore, but when this movie came out, everyone had it on DVD. So if you were at someone's house, you could just watch it. And I've seen this movie, like I said before, hundreds of times. So there really wasn't too many surprises. But yeah, I can't really think of real issues with the movie.
Wow.
So
okay,
it's high praise.
Michelle, as a first timer.
All right. Even though I thought that the writing was really good, and the comedy writing was really good, especially, I don't know if I had this in my head because I knew that like Seth Rogen also wrote this movie, and knowing that he kind of went on to do more things kind of with this group, and you really are getting like the Friends vibe. I just got the sense that so many of the scenes felt a little too long. The episode that we recorded before this one was Orange County, and one of the things that we loved about it was we felt like it was a really tight script. I would not say that about this movie. The parts that feel long almost feel indulgent in a way that I think I'm really sensitive to, because I struggle with this whenever I'm editing the podcast. I mean, me and Laura are really close. We think each other are funny, but I have to, and I'm not always the best at this, and this is kind of why I'm probably being overly critical. I feel like it's even harder to cut things when you're working on a project with like someone that you love and someone that you think is so funny. So I sense that the reason that some of maybe these extra scenes or the length of these scenes went on for so long is just because it was that much harder for them to cut things from it.
I was feeling it while watching this movie, which again is not a good sign of our attention span, but it is a longer movie. It's definitely not as tight, but it's tough when things are funny.
I'm sure they probably did cut stuff that they loved. And did you guys ever watch like bonus scenes or anything like that on your DVDs?
I think I have, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there definitely were some bonus scenes on this.
I miss that. Everything's on digital now, but why did we lose our commentaries, our deleted scenes, and all of that?
I know. If these companies were smart, they would, if they're trying to make an extra buck, just put it up behind a paywall and people would probably add it.
I would.
Yeah. The Criterion collection of Superbad.
Yes. Exactly.
Please.
We want the behind the scenes interviews.
All right, so I felt like that was the only really critical thing I have to say about the movie, but I feel like I have to bring up that the scene where Becca and Evan were hooking up was really hard to watch. It felt like entirely cringy, and I felt like it felt extra cringy because I kind of like saw myself in not that specific situation, but like acting like that when I should not have been. And not just me, I felt like I saw me and girls like me. When the movie first started and Becca was was introduced, I was like, I liked her immediately. Seems like she's not, trying to be someone that she wasn't. So I think that was the part that felt extra icky to me, is that, she's with this guy who she knows likes her, yet she's like very much like overcompensating for the situation. I wish that I would have been smarter than that in my young age. So just, that's something, as watching this as a adult, that was, I mean, I don't know if like other people, if guys feel this way, like seeing guys acting stupid, like if that makes you be like, oh my God, I cannot believe I used to say things like that too. But I don't know, Laura, if you had similar feelings about that scene.
There's some, I find parts of that scene honestly really funny because it is very cringy, and this is kind of like on a deeper level, but I wish that more guys would watch that scene, because speaking from a female perspective, especially more so in my college years, but I just feel like Evan's character, like, it's the least we're asking of men, really, in those situations. But like, truly, even from the beginning, like, I always get a little fired up, like when him and Seth are talking before the party, and Seth's like, oh, which is, looking back at it now, we used to joke about this line, but he's like, remember like when people are always like, oh, I was so fucked up, I shouldn't have fucked that guy, we could be those guys, which is like, I feel like that hasn't aged as well, even if it is realistic, because that's how guys talk to each other. But Evan is kind of like the no, like, I'm not like that, and I actually really care about this girl, and I just want to like sit and talk to her. And I don't think that there's enough priming of guys in middle school years to explain that that's not an appropriate way to act. So I actually think it's a little ahead of its time, if you will. It's always tough when we're talking about comedy and these really intense topics, because if these movies truly do influence us in a way to go on and be adults and go into college, these are things that I wish more parents like talk to their kids about and showed them ways where you can still have fun and enjoy your adolescence without doing things that you're really going to regret, and following the crowd and following what your friends think is cool. Just don't be an asshole.
Listen to your Aunt Laura.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have a sit down with our 6 nieces and nephews when they're going out to parties. Let me tell you that.
You need to watch this movie, Superbad, with me.
Yes. This is what you might be faced with. It's like the cringy videos that they, like the sex ed videos and things that they show you, but in a cool way, in a funny way. Dom, what do you think? I'm curious to have a male perspective on this.
Obviously, like if they were to remake the movie today, they either wouldn't make it or they would completely do away with those scenes they were talking about or do them differently. So it's difficult. So obviously, a lot of the scenes and dialogue come across today as either clunky or cringy or make you uncomfortable, either because it's just different from how we think today, or it's just a little too real. And it's difficult. I try to watch it, and this goes for every movie that's of its time. I try and watch it with it knowing in the back of my head that it's a product of its time, and you can't really put today's thinking into movies like that. And it's like a difficult balance. Like we're praising the movie for its authenticity in a sense of like this is how people speak, and like I guess maybe the more lighthearted aspects of high school life. And then it's like, at what point is it too real when it's like showing the negative aspects as well? High school buddy comedies like this, it's difficult because you don't want it to be too goofy and then it's like not really a movie. It's just like a gag with like no plot. But then if it's too serious, then it's not a comedy. So it's like trying to find that balance. And I feel like, like Seth's character at the end, like kind of learns his lesson, but not really. I feel like at the time it was a pretty progressive movie in the sense that he kind of learned his lesson. But the way society is now, it's not really like that much of like a lesson that he's learned. So I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted on how to feel about it.
I think it's tough with tone, and we've talked about this with a lot of our episode releases, Michelle, and it would be interesting to hear a perspective of someone who's made a movie themselves, because it could even be, obviously with this movie, the writers, they have such a say in the actual creation and what ends up actually going on the screen. But there are a lot of movies that I'm sure people write it in a way, and of the time they make creative decisions to make it funny or relevant of the time period so that it, gets a chuckle or gets something out of the audience. This is not one of those examples, but it's like, how do you find that tone and balance that's funny and realistic? But when you're showing these things, like, where is it promotion that it's okay to do those things versus showing, no, this is just like actually what happens? I think with a lot of things in this movie, it's more so like for the comedy and not as much for like, I'm trying to make a statement about this. So I'm happy you brought up that scene, because again, it's this dance where I think that they actually did it in a way that felt very realistic. I've been in that situation.
That's why it felt so cringy to me. It's because it was so real and it kept going on. And I'm like, oh, stop. I'm like, I don't want to like face this any more than you've already shown me.
Yeah.
But I think that this movie really, I mean, I know that there are things that we're saying like didn't age great, but like all things considered, I think this movie has aged wonderfully. And if anything, I think it, in addition to kind of what we were talking about in the beginning about making, kind of like a more inclusive kind of community within, high schoolers. But also, I thought that they handled kind of the like sex and alcohol together, like in a really good, positive way. Like they were having discussions about it and kind of making it clear, like, this is okay, this is not okay. Evan said like, oh, she's drunk, so like we can't hook up if I'm sober. And then the friend was like, so go get drunk. Then that scene was funny too. Him like trying to force himself to get drunk alone in the bathroom. Then I loved the being able to kind of almost I think it was actually like interspersed with the Evan and Becca hookup scene was then we get the scene with Jules and Seth where we kind of get this reveal that like she doesn't drink.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me so happy. It was almost like a relief to have that in there to kind of say, like, showcase to girls, like, you don't have to be that girl. You can be this girl and guys will still like you.
Yeah.
So I felt like that was really important that they included that. And I'm like, I'm proud of this. Is like two guys who wrote this movie when they were very young, that they had that insight or someone advised them to kind of like include that. I know we're in the what we dislike section, but that was one of the things I really liked.
Yeah. And we didn't really talk too much about Emma Stone and Jules's character because she's not, you know, she's like the driver of what he's like working towards. But I really love her character and the way that they portrayed her. You know, she's not the quintessential cool girl. She's her own person. She's everything that I wish I strived to be in high school, especially with her long dangling tube top that she wore, which was very of the time.
Even the heavy side bang?
Even the heavy side bang of the time. Our cousin Denise had that haircut in high school and it was very in.
I tried to do it a little bit. I remember it makes me think of the year 2007 when I was working in New York. I felt like all the other like art director girls all had the like the side bang haircut, and I remember going out for lunch once and like trying to do it, but like it didn't
just
translate well.
If you don't mind, before we go into the best section specifically for this movie, I do want to talk about some things that I didn't love. I just don't find the crude humor as funny this time around, and I don't think that they should have changed it because that's their comedy style. But even when I think about watching stand-up comedy, I've always gravitated more towards like the PG, subtle comedy without needing to include jokes about porn and sex. Like I just don't find it funny. And I think that is just my personal sense of humor. So I don't think it's much about what's wrong with the movie and probably just my comedy style. I think that Jonah Hill does a fantastic job in this movie. I think that he is just like a really mean person. Like I don't really think he's a good person or a good friend. And I know that they actually kind of talk about that. But I also think that they made parts of it very purposeful to show that he himself was bullied. And there were things that like I think ignited him to like have to put on this very like, I'm the leader and I'm making fun of people, so I feel better about myself. So I think it was like well written actually, but there are times where I'm like, oh my God, he's just so mean. And I just love Evan so much. So I think like that, and so much of the things that he is saying are crude. I definitely didn't enjoy watching him as much in this movie, as much as his character is so important.
I would agree with that. I felt like I just kind of tried to overlook it, and but they did try to redeem him and you know, really showcase that he was coming from a place of hurt.
He redeemed himself with the drunk carry home for sure.
I think Michael Cera, if it wasn't Jonah Hill, he would have been extremely annoying and unwatchable. And I think if Michael Cera wasn't in that role, he would be like a nothing role that's not funny and like quiet in the corner, and like he's somehow able to make like the quiet, distant character like so magnetic in like the center of every scene somehow, which is just great acting from both of them.
Yeah. Also really good physical comedy. There's this scene where they're coming out of the 7-Eleven and Seth is getting made fun of by one of their classmates and he says something really mean and Evan's like about Evan and Evan just like nods his head. He's just in like, man, I don't really care. And I like that dynamic that they're two friends that have different reactions where one doesn't really, he kind of is who he is and he doesn't really care what other people think about him. And Seth is like very reactive and like wants to, you know, stick it to anyone who's coming at him. So I think with everything bad that we've said, there's been like a good aspect of it.
Of all the kind of crudity, I did find I think probably the specificity of the Ghostbusters lunchbox full of the dick drawings.
Yes.
I thought that was really funny. And then the line, I was laughing so hard when Evan says, "Dick's like a man dick."
And also the music choice for that scene and the amount of creativity that they put in behind all the drawings and going into all the dick-shaped foods. So good. So good.
Well done.
I think it's more so like the porn for me, maybe because I know there's a lot of females that do watch porn, but I was never a porn watcher, so I didn't really have any connection to a lot of those parts of the movie, to be honest.
I have to say, like, that is why I really loved that line.
I'm just sick of all the amateur stuff, you know? I mean, like, if I'm paying top dollar, I want a little production value, you know? Like some editing, transition, something, some music.
I think I cannot deal with poor production value in any form. I'm sorry.
Yes. Michelle only watches high quality porn.
Please, if someone has that, then I might be open to it.
Yeah, maybe. We'll do a porn season.
You
It'll
might
be
need
great.
an explicit warning on this episode.
They're on
X.
every episode. Do you know who you're married to?
Okay. What we've all been waiting for. Dom, you have the honors. Favorite scene, favorite lines.
The home ec class I thought was really funny. The scene when Evan's stuck in the room and they force him to sing was really funny. You know, and this is kind of a reversal. People may be surprised for me saying this. I never really found McLovin that funny. He never really worked for me. I thought it was kind of like a little over the top or maybe overdone. And this time I thought it was so funny for some reason. I don't know, just like maybe looking in hindsight about the whole fake ID thing, having like a Hawaii ID with McLovin, age 25, is just so absurd. And I think, what's his name? Christopher Mintz-Plasse, I think the actor's name is. He's so funny in that role and like so, like with the Aladdin vest and everything. And that's another thing too, when I'm talking about how accurate the dialogue is, like that really white kid in high school who like only speaks in rap slang and like is so realistic. Just like that guy in the group that everyone just like is in the friend group, but everyone just makes fun of and is like, he's so annoying. I hate him, but he's like one of your best friends. Also the cops, like Bill Hader can like read a phone book and I would like laugh. So that was great. There's like callbacks I noticed like with them saying Evan looks like Jimmy's brother. Like the creepy guy who hits him with the car says the same thing. He's like, you know Jimmy? Like you look just like his brother. Favorite quotes. It's like what Laura was saying. I mean, it was a lot of the smaller lines. I mean, I can't be dishonest. Like when I watched this in high school, I loved like all the dick jokes and everything. Like I found that so funny. Like the first time I watched it, I remember and seeing the whole montage of him drawing the dicks. Like I remember sitting there like thinking this is comedy gold. Like this is the pinnacle of American comedy. But also at the time, like I don't know. I mean, it still is kind of funny, but just drawing penises on things is just funny. Like when people deface public property and draw like a penis, I just always found that funny.
In textbooks too.
I didn't really laugh at that as much. Same with Laura. I don't know if we're just too prude now, but I don't really find like the sexual humor funny. Sorry to go on a mini rant, but like I feel like whenever you go to a stand-up show and there's always the comedian like, I was watching porn the other day, and it's like, all right, come on, like you can be a little more creative than that. They had to have been. I'm sure these guys were improvised half the dialogue in this movie because like it was the small lines, like when the officers are interviewing the liquor store lady, and they're asking her to describe what he looked like. She's like, he kind of looked like Eminem. He was circular.
He was round.
Yeah, and that whole scene was just amazing. And like, did he look like you or did he look like me? And she's like, he looked like you. He's like Jewish. What else? The whole home ec scene, like when Seth is going off on the teacher and he's like, why do I need to know how to make tiramisu? Like, I'm never going to be a chef. Like this class is shit. Like, sorry for the language. And then just like Michael Cera, like the little things he whispers at the end of each line, like crack me up. Who are you, Seal?
There's the joke, but then they kind of just go along with it, but they say it very subtly. So like even during that home ec scene where he goes on that whole rant, and then at the end he goes, it's the last 2 weeks of school. Give me a fucking break. I'm sorry. cursing. They keep taking it a step far, but it's very like, it's these like hints that are just golds.
This is another thing I loved about the home ec scene is Evan's character is so like meek and nervous and shy, but then when he's with Maroki, he's like playful and like he's like, "Oh, don't keep me waiting over here." He has such a different relationship with Maroki. That's so funny.
I loved all the stuff with Maroki. Just another example of like, you know that these guys aren't friends, but in this situation, they're the best of friends.
And they make the most beautiful tiramisu. It's perfect. It looks like it's from a bakery.
I meant to bring this up earlier, Laura, because you mentioned, you know, getting to see like wood shop and getting to see them in home ec. I had both of those classes, so I'm wondering if it's more about they stopped doing it by the time you were in school and less about like our school not
I'm sure
having
they cut
it.
those classes.
We had a woodshop class in middle school and we got to make a little car. I remember, and race them, but it was more of like a technology.
Yeah, they called it
technology. But we didn't have it. I didn't have it in high school, and I never had. I think I had a home ec class in middle school. But we didn't cook anything. I don't even remember what we did.
Okay, yeah, no, you're right. I had
it was
both
more
of those
like
in middle school too. We baked. We made like pasta.
Oh my god, I'm so jealous.
This is kind of an example of how realistic Superbad is. My poor home ec teacher in middle school, we just completely were so rude to her, did not listen at all, and I don't think I baked one thing the entire class. Because she would talk, and we would chant Jerry, like from like the Jerry Springer show. She was like this quiet old lady, and be like, "Okay, class, so today we're making tiramisu," and it was all men in the class. I don't know how that happened. And like while she was speaking, we would just pound our fists and go, "Jerry, Jerry," and she would go, "Please, class, stop, I'm trying to teach you." It was awful.
As you're saying, I mean, like I feel like I remember people doing the Jerry thing too.
It was funny. I wasn't the leader. I'm a follower. I just do whatever the rest of the group was doing.
Laura, in addition to making a card, did you make a bow saw?
I remember using a bow saw. I don't remember making one though.
We made a bow saw.
What is a bow saw?
Like what it sounds like a saw, but it's like really big.
Well, no, it had like two like wooden posts and then like kind of a thing that went across and another thing that went across and maybe some string and then a blade. Mom and Dad used to have mine hanging in the garage.
Exactly. I actually feel like Dad used to use it sometimes, even though he never did anything handy around the house ever. But
like break down cardboard boxes.
I wish I made a bow saw.
It's not too late.
Maybe I'd have some skills later in life.
So we'll take a serious turn for a minute. I thought that the sleepover scene was so good.
Oh,
so sweet. And again, not what I was expecting from this movie. I liked their conversation. I feel like that scene really portrayed a guy friendship and like showing that it's like okay to love your friends and like shedding this kind of like toxic masculinity.
Yep.
I felt like this was kind of the beginning of the shedding of that. I didn't know anything about this movie before today, but I'm wondering if people have like pointed to this movie in like beginning to make change in culture for guys. The only thing that I didn't love was the scene right after it, like kind of like the morning after scene. I almost felt like it kind of ruins it a little bit. I don't know. I felt like that was just another example of like, that should have been cut. It didn't feel like it fit for me.
I also think now that you're saying it, like the mall scene is fine, but how it would have been really cool to just end it with them at that sleepover. And then it's just like, all right, they went on to school and they stayed friends.
I agree. I think that would have been like nice and clean. So I have a favorite quote and a favorite line, or favorite phrase. I really liked the phrase that you're a 25-year-old Hawaiian organ donor. All right, so we've referenced the vest a few times in this episode, and I loved the line, "I'm trying to look older," and then he says, "You look like Pinocchio." I mean, Dom used the reference of Aladdin, which they say afterwards in that same scene of it being an Aladdin vest. not to keep hammering this point home, but I feel like that is another example of like one of those is funny, but like both of them makes both of them less funny to me. Like when they said the Aladdin, I was like, oh, like I wish you would have just picked one and like ran with it.
Yeah.
It would have punched harder for me.
Okay. Buckle up, guys.
Okay, Laura.
Okay. I think one of the funniest things is really at the beginning of the movie when they go to the 7-Eleven and they're talking about Jules's track record of dating. And he goes, "Are you insane? Look at Jules's dating record."
She dated Dan Remick, who's had a six-pack since like kindergarten. Jason Stone, who looks like fucking Zach Morris, and Matt Muir. Matt Muir, he's the sweetest guy ever.
I'm so glad that you brought that scene up. That was also one of my favorites, and I can't believe I didn't write it down. But I feel like that is just another example of this really specific, great writing where they're just being really honest in what like they're thinking and not worrying about like sounding stupid. Like I don't know any guy I went to high school with who would have actually like said those words that like, you know, he has a six pack and like, oh, he's so sweet. Like the way that he was talking about him is like he truly thinks that he is a sweet guy. Like no guy would ever say that about any guy, but I wish that they would.
In high school, there were people who actually, like, if you were sitting alone or like you were just like by yourself, like you would be like, oh, you're gonna be a Glansberg right now. So like the Steven Glansberg quote really I think is held up well. I just love the way that he says it, like, you're gonna make me sit here like I'm fucking Steven Glansberg, and it's just a kid like eating pudding. And I actually feel like that carried into, I would always think about that in when I started my first job, because like everyone ate at their desks, and I would always say like, I feel like Steven Glansberg, like eating my sad salad in front of my computer right now. I always thought that the soccer scene was funny when Seth comes sprinting onto the field and he's out of breath, and Dave Franco has a cameo and he's like, runs by and he's like, why don't you go piss your pants again? She's like, it was like 8 years ago, asshole. And then it's just very subtle, and Seth goes, people don't forget. The entire scene when McLovin comes and brings his ID, and just the dynamic of Seth getting so pissed off, and he's like, you only have one fucking name. Like, he cannot get over the concept that it's, you know, one name. Evan's like sweetness of it, that he's like, it's not that bad, you know? Also a very subtle line, but I love the callback that they do when he goes and he's like, you shouldn't park in staff parking, you're not allowed to do that. And then they show up and his car is gone, and Fogel points it out too, and he's like, why would you park in staff parking? You're not staff. Liquor store scene with the cops, absolutely fantastic. I know we've already talked about this, but I would always quote this with Denise, where she's going off and she's like, I'm not supposed to be working here. Like, I want to be a vet. I have a veterinary exam. And then Bill Hader goes, apparently someone has an exam tomorrow. Like, when she finally gets up and runs away. I love the scene where they're sitting at the bar and Bill Hader and Seth Rogen are talking about how he met his wife here and she was like a whore. And he's like, words of advice: don't meet a woman at the bar, like meet her at like the farmer's market or a Pilates class, something a little bit more communal. While all of that is going on in the background, he's getting like a radio, please, I need backup, there's so much blood. I don't know what they would call that in comedy, but it's kind of like the things that are going on behind the scenes while the normal conversation is happening, that I just think is really, really smart writing. When they show up to the party and bust the party, like at Jules's house, and Bill Hader goes, oh no, it's the cops. And last one that I'm going to say that is a subtlety, but I mentioned it earlier. When I think it's supposed to be like a homeless guy that they pick up, and he's on the bus, and it's like after he escaped out of the car, and they all get on the bus, and he goes,
hey, it's you, McMuffin.
Favorite scenes, I think that Dom already said it, but the party scene, the entire thing front to back, they even cut to other scenes while that entire thing is going on, but from the minute that they walk in the room and Evan's on the phone with Becca and he gets nervous and he doesn't even say anything. He just says, okay, bye, and hangs up because he's like, I need to get out of this situation. That line, he says, my brother came all the way here from Arizona and you're not going to sing for him? That song is long, but I die laughing the whole time. And I love that everyone gets emotional. Like the guy who just had so much cocaine starts crying. This is ironic for being part of our back to school season that we haven't really talked about any scenes that took place in school, obviously besides like wood shop and home ec. But the awkwardness of Evan and like him and Becca have two different scenes where they're interacting in the hallway. So like after class, he's so like sweet about it. He's like, nope.
No, you won't. No, it's my treat, miss.
Really?
Yep, and that's that. It's the first of many, too, so get used to it, sister.
And trying to be like so respectful. But the scene where he punches her in the boob by accident and like she walks away and he just keeps being like, sorry. They crushed it. They crushed it with the quotes.
They
did a great job. Dom, did this movie make you want to eat or drink anything?
Alcohol in a laundry detergent container.
Honestly, it looked cool.
I don't think there's really any food in the movie besides Steven Gleinsberg eating the yogurt, the tiramisu.
Do you have a favorite dick-shaped food?
Sausage. I'm a big fan of bangers and mash.
Evan's eating cereal in the beginning, Cocoa Puffs.
Mm-hmm. Evan's not the healthiest, having slushies before school.
They make reference to pizza bagels, but I don't think we see them.
Oh, love a pizza bagel.
I love a pizza bagel too. My questions are multiplying, but I feel like these are also good questions for the audience too. And don't forget, you can text us or call us or leave a comment. But we see them eating like school lunch chips. If you had to get a bag of something, what would you pick?
Okay, this is embarrassing, but I used to kind of like Funyuns. Would not get that now. I'm not going off of like my favorite potato chip. It's more so like the ones that you find in vending machines. I really like cheddar Ruffles.
Oh, those are great.
They're
love
really
those.
good.
Yeah.
Those are great. They're so unhealthy and delicious.
How about you, Dom?
I do like Funyuns. I would never buy them or eat them in public out of fear of like being mocked or made fun of. I'm not really a big chip person. I'm probably the youngest person to eat these, but I like Wheat Thins.
I love Wheat Thins too.
That's probably really my only chip, but my parents would never buy like the Wheat Thins brand. They would buy the Wegmans like private brand, like the cheaper one.
I think I was really into the puffed cheese doodles.
Wow, that's surprising.
I would not pick those now.
What is your favorite vending machine item, audience? We want to know.
I have another question. We hear about the Kyle's Killer Lemonade and the Goldslick vodka, which are parodies of, I'm assuming, Mike's Lemonade and Goldschlager, kind of, I guess, even though it's a vodka. So this is a 2-question segment. What were you drinking the first time you ever drank or got drunk? And the second question is, what was your go-to beverage when you were, I didn't really drink in high school. So for me, it would have been in college. But I guess for you two and for the audience, it could be your go-to drink when you were a young drinker in high school or college.
This is like a 3-part answer for me.
Okay.
So one of the first things that I ever drank was Hypnotic with Denise. I don't even know. It's in a pretty blue bottle, but it was one of those things where it was like, you just take whatever is on your parents' bar cart. And Aunt Sally and Uncle Joe clearly got this alcohol like 10 years ago and no one had drank it. So I don't know how old we might have been like freshmen in high school, and we put it in iced tea and we're like drinking in the basement and we thought we were so cool. In high school, Busch Light was more college. Keystone was it was like the cheapest beer. And I remember being in like a field at a party and someone had like Keystone ices that were very warm and probably skunked. And when I got to college, so freshman year, I would mostly drink Bacardi Dragonberry. and it was the thickness of syrup, pretty much. And I used to have that with vending machine Hawaiian punch. My go-to kind of like drink throughout college when I went out was usually a sour amaretto.
Wow. All right, Dom, how about you?
First time I drank was probably rum and Coke, like one that was sitting out. So it was like a room temperature and the Coke was flat. My go-to drink in high school, I mean, my parents don't really drink, so the only thing I could really get my hands on at the time was liquor like passed down from generations of grandparents. So it would be like a dusty bottle of Sambuca that from like 1876. So I would bring that to parties, and which I don't know if I don't know if listeners know what Sambuca is. It's like old Italian men liquor. You're supposed to put in your like espresso in the morning, like on
Like
the
a
streets
splash
of
of it.
Naples. Yeah. So I would mix that with I don't know. So that's really what it is. So like unintentionally classy, I guess. When me and the boys would be drinking espressos at the party. In college,
very South Jersey of you.
I don't know why we did this, but it would really just be beer and vodka, but like the cheapest possible for some reason. Even though we really could afford like the next level up of beer, but I guess it was kind of fun to drink like garbage beer. Dennis, friend of the pod, him and I at Toads would be drinking the beer and the shot combo, vodka shot and a beer.
Couldn't do that now, but
Yeah, it was rough.
The reason I even brought up this question is because the first time I got drunk, it was on Mike's Hard Lemonade. So I didn't drink in high school at all, so I didn't have a go-to drink. But I think, Dom, you bringing Sambuca to a high school party is incredible. But in college, I think one of the first drinks I really had that I like was like, this is really good, was Malibu with pineapple juice. And Malibu is like a coconut rum. But then a little later in college, I discovered that you could get like a really big bottle of Bacardi Cocoa, which is like kind of the same thing, except it was like a higher proof, I think, and you could get more for less money. So then I used to buy like giant bottles of it. And I must have gotten someone to buy them for me. And then when we used to go to parties, I used to fill up a water bottle, not like a Poland Spring, like a sports water bottle, and it would be like half of the Bacardi Cocoa and like half Coke. So it was like just way more than I needed, but that was my go-to. And then I remember junior year getting really into Bacardi Raz with Sprite. Like kids in college today are like so much healthier, and they have all these seltzers now that are low calorie. I mean, I gained so much weight in college because of what I drank, and we didn't have the same options.
There's just so many options. So I think this week for our dinner party, let's see, I think that we should all give each other one person, and we'll decide what they're bringing to the table.
How do you feel about doing a drink edition?
A drink,
like
sure.
What we bring to Jules's house party.
Love this. What are we drinking in the bathroom together at Jules's house? We'll each first give each other one so we can really understand the essence of this group bonding. So Dom, I'm gonna give you the bum who calls Fogel McMuffin.
Michelle, I'll give you the creepy guy who hit Seth with his car.
All right. And Laura, I'm going to give you the liquor store clerk / aspiring vet.
I think that she might just be a like Cabernet lady. Like, I don't think that she likes cocktails too much. Like, especially because she works at the liquor store. It's like really triggering for her because she just has like assholes coming in all the time that she doesn't even want to drink when she's on her break. So I could see her going to like the Buy Wise next door that has like a really big, okay wine selection. I honestly think that she's just going with like a heavy Cabernet. And I think she's bringing like solo cups from the store. So dumb.
I don't know. I mean, he's a bum, so I would think he's kind of just going empty-handed and stealing other people's alcohol and drinking.
What do you think he's stealing from Jules's house?
Probably the laundry detergent laced alcohol in the containers. And he doesn't realize that he doesn't pick up on the taste of the laundry detergent and the alcohol. He probably actually prefers that.
I'm actually remembering now he stole one of the jugs when he runs away. So when they get on the bus, he's like drinking it. Which just makes the scene so much funnier now that I'm thinking about it. So that checks out. Maybe he just brings...
I mean, that's a pretty big container, so he's not sharing with anyone. It's for him, so
yeah,
that'll probably last him a few crashed parties that he's going to.
Yeah, I think he's making his way around the valley.
I think he's going to save that container too.
Yeah, Michelle, what is the car hitter?
I looked up his name. His name is Francis. Francis the driver.
Frank. Yeah,
it would be Francis.
And I think that Francis seems like a Jägermeister guy to me.
That checks out.
I think he's down to just take shots right from the bottle. But if he shows up at the party and he knows that he's going to end up in this situation where the three of them are going to be in the bathroom together, I could see him maybe scoping out some of those like tiny disposable shot glasses that are like, like it's like plastic, but they're like colored.
Yeah,
I think that he would bring those in and be like, now this is a party.
I could definitely see Francis like trying to hit on Mindy.
Yes.
Like inappropriately. And also including the other guy on like a threesome.
Yeah, probably. Who knows?
This is a pretty wild party.
And then I'd like to believe that that's when Evan stumbles in when he's like trying to get drunk. Okay, Dom, are you ready? This is your first This or That segment. As a returning guest on the pod, you've been on a couple episodes, but this is an intense segment. So are you ready?
Yes.
So you're going to 7-Eleven before high school in the morning. Are you getting a slushie or a Red Bull?
It would have to be a slushie.
What color? This is important.
I feel like the slushie station usually has like a specialty seasonal flavor. So I'd probably do that just to hear. The last time I had a slushie was probably when Superbad came out. Because I remember having a flavor, it was like a Coca-Cola flavored slushie. And I was like, I got to know what this is about. And it wasn't good. It just tasted like like you accidentally left a Coke can in the freezer. It wasn't good. But I would just out of curiosity usually get like the seasonal flavor. It's too much. And it gets everywhere. And it's always in the back of the 7-Eleven, and like there's always some illicit behavior going on back there. It's just not, the whole thing is not good.
Slushies need a facelift is what we're getting at. Wood shop or home ec?
Wood shop.
Really? Says the chef over here. Okay.
Yeah, but
you don't need to improve your skills.
Home ec, you're not really making nice dishes. You're making tiramisu is a pretty nice dish, but you're not really doing like very great dishes. I feel like woodwork, you're actually building stuff. Like I could use a bow saw.
Yeah.
I wish I knew how to make a bow saw.
It's never too late. Okay. Would you rather throw up while hooking up with someone or headbutt someone from being too drunk?
Headbutt.
You're showing up at a party. Are you bringing Goldslick vodka or Kyle's Killer Lemonade?
My inner Ida is going to come out, and I'm going to say Kyle's Killer Lemonade because I don't know what's the gold. I don't know if that's okay to drink or...
That's fair.
While we were speaking, I was looking up Mike's Hard Lemonade to see what the latest is with them. And it's crazy that you can't... They don't have to show the ingredients of the alcoholic drink. Like, it's just...
Yeah, great point.
You don't have to know. So how
Same
do I
with
know
all the
that
seltzer
gold...
companies.
Yeah, it's not... So that's...
They don't disclose.
Biden, if you're listening, you look into that. But yeah, I would just be concerned about the gold, if that's okay to consume.
Would you rather get hit by a cop car or get busted for having a fake ID? After being
Get hit
punched.
by a cop car.
My last question is similar to yours, but a little bit different, so I'll keep it in. First one. Would you rather sing These Eyes to a room full of guys doing coke or dance with a girl who gets period blood all over your pants?
Oh, that's easy. The singing to the guys. I don't like singing in public. I don't have a good singing voice, but I feel like if you're with a bunch of strangers, like all doing lines of coke, it's a pretty easy audience. Like they're not really gonna heckle you or anything.
If it wasn't These Eyes, what song would you have picked if you were in that situation?
Yeah, it wouldn't be These Eyes. Maybe I'd pull a Laura and sing Joni Mitchell, which she's done to my family at a wedding. It'd have to be a song in my key, so I'm not sure.
I don't
Maybe
think the Coke guys would be able to help you.
Yeah.
I would need audience suggestions. I can't really. I want a crowd pleaser.
We want to know, audience, what song would you pick if you were in the Evan situation in a room full of coked out guys? These eyes.
All right, next question. Would you rather wear the Pinocchio vest or the blue Johnny Cash shirt?
The blue Johnny Cash shirt is very unironically cool. That is a very cool shirt. And I think I'd have an easier time pulling that off. I think if you're wearing the Pinocchio vest, you're either not at all fashionable or so fashionable that you're beyond fashion. Like, you know, when you go to like the hip neighborhood and everyone's just wearing like dad clothes and they're just so hip that it's hip.
Yeah. Yep.
I would like to think that if I was to wear the vest, like I'm so fashionable that I'm like forcing it to be fashionable. But I think the Johnny Cash shirt is like a safer bet. Like that's just reliably like a very hip shirt.
Okay. If you're at the mall with a girl, would you rather go with her to pick out concealer or a comforter?
Oh, a comforter, 100%. I'm not trying to sound like one of those like Joe Rogan, like fellas, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's just very like going comforter shopping is not, doesn't bother me. I could, because you get to at least try the samples, like some like if they let you go on the bed, or if you're at a bedding store, that's nice. But a makeup store, like I'm not. I appreciate good like skincare, but I just the atmosphere of like Sephora is just very off-putting and very like unwelcoming.
It is.
And also like they don't. It's like worse when they have like the couch in the front of the store, which is for like the men. Because like they're like, fellas, like you don't want to be like while the women are doing this, like you guys can hang out. Like it just makes it's a very uncomfortable environment. Shopping for bedding is more welcoming. Like everyone's welcome. It's not segregated by gender.
What happened when we went to Credo Beauty the other day though? That's not
I just didn't want to be.
It's a very welcoming.
There's like an
store.
invisible force field of just.
He walked in. He walked right out. And I lost him. I went back outside and I had $150 worth of products and I was calling him and he shows up with a salt and straw ice cream in his hand.
Ooh.
So I guess it was a good decision on his part to leave.
I think there's an untapped market for interactive makeup stores. Maybe like put a little arcade game or so. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not for me to decide. If there's any Nathan For You watches out there when he builds the man cave in the back of the women's store where the guys hang out, watch sports, and drink beer, they need something like that at the makeup stores.
All right. Last question. This is similar to Laura's, but slightly different. Would you rather get caught with a Ghostbusters lunchbox full of drawings of dicks or get caught with a fake ID?
I mean, it depends on who's catching you.
Why is this taking you so long to answer?
It's hard. I feel like this is hard.
Is that an easy question for you?
Well, it depends. If it's like mom and dad finding my ID, I'd be fine with it, but not if it's a cop.
I mean, I probably the first one. I mean, I don't.
Laura, would you not be alarmed if you came across Dom had a Ghostbusters lunchbox that was full of dick drawings?
Yeah, I'm saying that's worse
that's
than a fake
very
ID.
concerning.
Yeah, but
you won't go to jail
ID,
for that, though.
Breaking the law.
Yeah. Only 7% of people suffer from it, so I would find you unique in that scenario.
What's next, Laura?
So we're gonna take quite the turn, and we are going to be covering Matilda. So
Children's film.
Millennial parents, if you enjoyed this episode, I really hope you didn't listen to it with your kids, but we got a treat for you next week. Make sure you come and listen.